I don't know what the students think, but it's always exciting, like having Zoom conferences, and sometimes it works and it won't work. But we really appreciate that you have time, that you are on Zoom here with us. And we just wait a couple of more minutes and then we would start. And Eva, a very important question, in German or in English, what would you prefer?
At the moment, I notice we're speaking English.
Yes,
but
good.
Of course, English, so it's not my mother tongue. English, I've lived here for 70 years. So, of course, it's much more fluent in English. But nevertheless, of course, being born in Vienna and being my mother tongue, I've never forgotten it. But of course, at that time, when I was a young child, I had a different conversation, different words using, and I never spoke about Holocaust and things like that, as you can well imagine. So this vocabulary in this field might not be so perfect. So I think if you want, I can try in German and possibly mix it a little bit. But if you like, I can speak whatever. What do you think would the students like better?
Well, students, what do you like?
What do the students want?
What you would like.
As I say, I prefer English, but I don't mind having a go in German. But of course, for me, it is important that the student understand everything I'm saying. If they say they miss quite a bit of it, then of course it's not so good. So it depends really on the quality of their English, which I would like to ask them what they think. You've heard me now speak in English. I speak slowly. Is it all clear or not really?
English is fine, I think.
I can only speak for myself, of course, but I think you're very well understandable, and it's important that you choose the words that come to you easiest.
So what is the verdict? Shall I carry on in English?
They are nodding again.
Well, then you have, besides a history lesson, you have as well a lesson in English, which might be quite useful.
I think that's very useful, Eva. Eva, it is 10:30 German time. It is 9:30 English time. Are you all ready for us to start? Can we start?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, that is great. So I would like to say, like mixing the languages, Guten Morgen, von München nach London. Dear Eva Schloss, a very warm welcome. We are very happy to have you here within us, within like this Zoom meeting, which is a very special meeting for us. We are very happy that you have time for us today. And like we said before, the heads you see here are students who are in Holocaust courses here at the university. And you also see project members of us, because we have like quite a lot of different Holocaust projects at the university here at Munich. And when I was preparing myself for this Zoom conference, I was a little bit of like unsure how to introduce yourself. Because as you wrote in your book, you cover a full circle of life. I could introduce you as a photographer. I also could introduce you as an owner of Edgeware Antiques. I also could introduce you as the president of the Anne Frank Trust in London in Great Britain. Or I could introduce you as a person whose testimony was transformed in a digital testimony, or a woman who became or is a member of the British Empire. So we are really impressed on your life, and this life started out quite happily. You were born in Vienna and you really grew up in a very happy family. Till in 1938, your life changed dramatically. And Eva, it would be wonderful for us if you could now continue a little bit telling us about your life, about your suffering during and after the Holocaust, and also being a Holocaust survivor. And we would then turn over to different questions and ask you some more questions. And I would like to stress that again, that we are very honored that you have time for us today, because you are a very famous speaker of the Holocaust, a very famous survivor who speaks up for humanity, against anti-Semitism, and you're always supporting to take care of each other. Eva, it's great to have you here in the computer, and yeah, it's your turn now.
Well, thank you for your introduction. I'm afraid I have one more question. How long have we got?
We will end at 12. The
12.
Zoom meeting will end at 12, yeah.
Your time, my
Your
time.
time.
Yeah, my
time.
Yeah.
So 1.5 hours.
Yeah, 11
Okay.
o'clock your time.
Okay, well, that's a good time. That's great. Because very often people say, well, you have 45 minutes. And there's a lot to debate and to discuss, especially now, where there's again a different kind of unrest in the world, which is actually quite horrific. And I know it is not a Holocaust, but it's racism. And this is actually what the Holocaust was as well. It was definitely racism, religious racism. So we haven't really learned anything. And this is just today, speaking today on this day, where there's so much trouble again. It is very, very important that we learn and change our attitude, which unfortunately has not happened yet. So as you have heard, I'm an Austrian citizen. I was an Austrian citizen. We loved our country. My family had been there for generations. We were Jewish, but definitely not religious. But you might know, and I don't know if it's in Germany as well, in Austria at that time, you had to have religious education in school, already in primary schools. So in my class, when I was about 6 years old, I remember there were about 7 Jewish children in our class. Those children were called out twice a week. We went into a different classroom and we had Jewish education, meaning the little ones, of course, had more Bible stories, songs, a little bit of Hebrew, and all the festivals. And as I said to you, we were not a religious family, but through being educated in school with good teachers, we children became very enthusiastic, and we demanded from our parents to keep all those holidays. So again, through learning, it changed our attitude. We were very happy that older brother, extended family, parents, cousins, we all did excursions. Austria is a beautiful country. My father and me were the sporty ones in the family. In the winter, we went skiing. In the summer, we went mountain climbing and swimming, and it was really idyllic. All this stopped in March 1938. I was 9 years old when the Nazis, without permission, just marched in and occupied Austria. There was supposed to be a plebiscite, a voting, if Austria wanted to join Germany or if they wanted to stay independent. But Hitler didn't wait for that because he knew perhaps it would be against him. But again, surprisingly, the Austrians were very, very enthusiastic. They stood in the street with swastika flags and the Heil Hitler salute. And we Jewish people, knowing already what had happened in Germany in 1938, many Jewish people had lost their jobs, were arrested. There were no concentration camps yet in 38. And but it became very, very dangerous to go out to school, to do anything. My brother, who was 12, he came home the next day and he looked terrible. He was beaten up, blood was streaming, his clothes were torn. And when my parents questioned him, what has happened to you? He said, my friend did that and the teachers watched and let it happen. So you can imagine how scared we had become. My father, obviously, of course, he didn't, children were not really involved, had known something like that might happen, and he had made plans to somehow escape, which was at that time in the beginning still possible. So very, very quickly, he escaped to Holland. He had a shoe factory, very big shoe factory, which he had inherited from his father. And he had a lot of business with Holland, where in the south of Holland, there was a big shoe industry. And he had exported there and he knew all the people. So he went there and he was immediately accepted as a co-worker. And we still stayed. My mother said, you can't just, her parents, her sister, all the family was there. We can't just go and leave them alone and just not planning what they were going to do and so on. So we had family conferences and all that, and things became worse. Jewish people were arrested, were beaten up, and in the street, the shops were looted immediately. And as it turned out, the Austrians were actually even more Nazi than the Germans. So eventually, my father decided it's time for us to leave. It was very, I can't go into details, it was difficult how to get a visa and so on. And we were not officially able to go, and we went to Belgium illegally. That is something which we understand very well, how many refugees now come illegally to all the countries in Europe. So like I said, nothing really has changed. And again, those refugees are not welcome. We were definitely not welcomed in Belgium, but the government obviously let Jewish people in. I was yes, I think 10 years old. I was put in a French-speaking school, had no idea, didn't understand the word. And, you know, at that time, refugees were very rare. Nobody had ever seen a child from Austria. And they looked at me, who was this child who doesn't play with us, he doesn't understand what we are saying. That was, you know, it was terrible. So I lost all my confidence. I was a very cheerful, open child. I became miserable, I became depressed. But, you know, eventually you learn the language. I made some friends, and it was my 10th birthday. And we lived in a boarding house. We were not able to take anything with us. We had to leave all our belongings behind, not even enough clothes. So we were very poor, actually, at the time. In this boarding house, we had 2 rooms, one for me and my brother, and the other one for my mother. And my father came the weekend to visit. So we were not anymore a family. And so it was my birthday, and I was the landlady in the boarding house in Vienna. I had beautiful parties. In May, you know, it was always lovely weather, a garden party, it was lovely. And I wanted again a little party. And the landlady said, yes, you can invite 4 or 5 girls. And the day of my birthday, all the girls brought a letter from the parents that they're not allowed to come to my party. Can you imagine what an impact it has on a 10-year-old? So I was very, very sad and disappointed, and I couldn't understand, why am I different? What have I done? So, and my parents explained me, well, because a Jew, you are not welcome in this society. Why? You know, I don't know anything different. I don't act different. Well, that's just how it was. So eventually my father tried all the time to get a visa for us to Amsterdam, because in the meantime, Hitler had gone to Poland and Czechoslovakia first, then to Poland, and the Second War started. And we were still living in different countries. And my father said, if a war is, the borders are closed and we won't be able to see each other anymore. So eventually in February 1940, during the war, we got a visa from the Dutch to visit my father for 3 months. So my father hired a furnished apartment on the Merwedeplein, that is a little square in Amsterdam, and where more German refugees had moved, and we moved in there. It was furnished because a Jewish woman who used to live there had escaped to Switzerland. So it was very, very nice. We were a family again. The Dutch were very welcoming. I went to school. I knew a little bit. That's quite interesting. You know, Belgium is a 2-language country, French and Flemish. And Flemish is similar to Dutch. And we had to learn Flemish. So I knew a little bit. I wasn't completely lost. And I made friends. At school, I could understand a little bit, and in school, in primary school already, we learned even French, and I was, of course, very good at that. So when the teacher asked something, I was always to put up my hand. I knew all the questions, so it was okay. And after school, because in an apartment you have no gardens to play, there was this big open square. All the children came out to play, and I made lots of friends. I got a bicycle, and one day a little girl introduced herself, and her name was Anne Frank, because her family had escaped from Germany, or at the time it was still easy, in 1933, when Anne was 4 years old, and they moved to the same square. And we became friends. We were the same age. She was just 1 month younger than I. She couldn't speak any German, so she took me to her apartment so that I could speak with her family in German. And we became friends. And she was already much advanced than me. She was already big flirt. She was interested in boys. And when I told her I had an older brother, she said, when can I come and meet him? But my brother wasn't interested in a girl the age of his sister. So nothing happened. And then, unfortunately, in May, so after a few months, when we were supposed to go back to Belgium, the Germans invaded Holland. And 5-day war, the Dutch gave up and the Germans entered. We still tried to escape to England, but it wasn't possible. So we thought, well, what now? Nothing happened. The Germans wanted not to become too unpopular with the Dutch people. But after several months, the measures against the Jewish people started to come up. Meaning we were not allowed to go out in the morning, there was a curfew, not in the evening. We were not allowed to go on public transport. We were not allowed to go up to cinemas, to swimming pool, to parks, different benches, sort of an apartheid, different benches, not allowed for Jews to sit on certain benches. It was terrible, but it wasn't life-threatening. So we thought, well, if it stays like that, we can cope with it. And this was perhaps for 1 year, but it became more and more difficult to lead an ordinary life. Then we had to leave our schools and go to Jewish schools. Well, you would say, so what? There are a lot of Jewish people who send their parents, the children, to Jewish schools. But what happened, the Nazis wanted to kill the young people first. So they went with trucks to those schools, told the children from several classes, go on the truck. Children had to go. The parents waited in the evening for the children to come home, and they didn't turn up. So they went to the local police to find out what has happened, didn't get any information. They even went to the Nazis, even there they were not let in, didn't get any information. So children were never ever seen again. Only after the war did one hear they were sent to Mauthausen. Have you heard of this camp in Austria? A terrible, terrible camp. And they were just thrown down from the cliffs. But luckily we didn't know that. So people disappeared, especially young men. My brother, he was 16 by that time, quite a tall young man. He was afraid to go out in the street. He was afraid to stay home because in the evening, when there was a curfew, the bell rang, Nazis came and arrested the male people. So you can imagine each day we were still together as a family. It was a blessing. So in June 1942, about 10,000 young people, young means from the age of 16, that was including my brother and Anna Frank's older sister Margot, 16, and many of their friends, and as well 20-year-old, 22-year-old people, a call-up notice to report with a backpack. It says exactly what they were able to bring, to be deported to Germany to work in German factories. Well, by that time, in 1942, the concentration camps had already opened, and we knew what was happening. Ghettos where Jewish people were killed, concentration camps in Germany and Poland. So why should they invite Jewish people to come back to Germany? So many parents, including my father and Otto Frank and many others, decided they wouldn't send their children. But you can't just stay in your apartment. So what now? So my father called us together one evening and he said, Heinz, we are not sending you. We are going to go into hiding. I was 13 years old. I looked at my father and I said, what do you mean hiding? I know the game hide and seek, but adults don't hide. I couldn't understand. And my father explained. I found some wonderful Dutch people who are willing to open their homes to keep us there. But unfortunately, you know, the apartments are quite small there. People don't live in big houses. I didn't find a family who could take 4 people. So we split this up now. You will go with mother and Heinz will go with me. And I started to cry. I was very, very attached to my brother and to my father. I didn't want to be separated. And my father explained, if we're in two different places, the chance that 2 of us will survive is bigger. Survive. I was 13 years old, and I think this was the first time that I realized it might be a matter of life and death. And that is pretty scary for a 13-year-old. But this is what happened. So before my brother had to go to this place, we went early in the morning with a little suitcase, not to be no star, of course, through the streets, hoping that we would get safely to the address which had been given to us. So we were in hiding for 2 years. I can't tell you, I tell you just a little detail because there's a lot more to tell. The Germans knew said perhaps 5,000 people had come, but where there are also 5,000 young people, and they really wanted to get all those Jewish people. So they made house searches. So in the night, they knocked on doors. Many Nazis and Dutch Nazis as well went round and knocked on door. People had to open and let them search their home. And so in every hiding place where we were, we had a hiding place within the hiding place. People from the resistance, all the occupied countries had people who hated to be occupied. So there were people who boycotted what the Nazis were doing. They blew up train, they shot particularly bad Nazis, they printed ration books, they found places for Jewish people to hide, but as well they came to those houses, to those apartments and built hiding places. So when this knock came, we quickly went, always at night, we quickly went in there, hoping they wouldn't find us. But we heard the story in another place. The same thing happened. The Nazis came searching. People had been hiding there, had gone to their hiding place, but the Nazis felt the bed. They were still warm. So they demolished the whole apartment till they found the people. And the hosts were arrested as well. So if people hear those stories, people say, well, you know, I'm sorry, you can't stay any longer. So we had to move. Well, we were hiding 2 years. We moved perhaps 6 or 7 times. The same with my father and brother. So after 2 years in hiding, the address where my father was staying in the country at the time, the woman was blackmailing them for more money. Well, if you can't earn, all our savings were getting very, very little. And my father phoned my mother and he said, look, we have not more money. If the war still lasts much longer, we are broke and the woman is going to throw us out. So please find a hiding place. We were in Amsterdam, they were in the country. And we were in touch with resistance people. So, and in 1944, it was very difficult to find new hiding places. Many people had been arrested. Many didn't dare to do it anymore. So it took my mother perhaps 3 weeks to find a new place. Eventually, a Dutch nurse came forward and says, yes, she will take them in. She has a safe house. It turned out she was a double agent and she betrayed them. And I'm not going into details. We had visited them because it was near where we were, and we were followed, and we were all 4 of us arrested. It was just on my 15th birthday. So you can imagine how we felt. We were taken first night in a prison, then to a holding camp, and within a few days, we were already put on a list to be transported eastward. And we knew what that meant, because the BBC, the British Broadcast Corporation, then broadcast out in all the languages to the occupied countries. And the Dutch broadcast, where we did listen, it was illegal to listen, always told about the progress of the war. And in 1944, it was good. There was talking of an invasion, of liberating, but as well, they said, there are 300 death camps and concentration camps in Germany and Poland. And Auschwitz was always mentioned being the worst, where Jewish people were systematically being gassed. And you know, I've never ever met a German who said they knew anything about it. It was very, very well known. And if ever you've been to Germany and perhaps even visited a camp besides Auschwitz, they were always next to a big city. The trains were going through those cities, the trains were going, the Jewish neighbors of German and Austrian people disappeared. How can people not know what is going on? So this was all a lie. So the train, I'm not going again too much in details. It was cattle trucks, I call it, goods train, like a container. About 80 people were pushed into it. It was boiling hot in May. We had 2 buckets, one for drinking water, one for use for toilets. Once a day, those were changed. Once a day, they got chunk of bread they threw in. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. Because from relative safety, relative luxury, it wasn't luxury, but compared to that, whatever where we were hiding was just fantastic. So I must say I've complained enough about it. But, you know, the change in a matter of a week was just unbelievable. And, but the only good thing, nice thing, special thing was we were together as a family. And my father, with tears in his eyes, apologized that from now on he won't be able to look after us. We'll be being on our own. He gave us hints, always help each other, try to be clean, wash your hands, and all kind of. Later I had to smile about thinking what my father thought, what might happen to us. And my brother, just it's very important for me to tell about him. We were very, very close together. We loved each other. I missed him very, very much. We were together again. He was he was nearly 18 years old, 17 years old at the time. And he was a very, very talented musician. He could play any instrument. He composed, but in hiding, of course, he had to be quiet. And so he started to paint. He created some amazing artwork. And he told me in the cattle truck, this was one of the last conversations I had with him, that in hiding, when he painted it and when they escaped from this woman who blackmailed them, he hid the paintings under the floorboards with a note on it. This belonged to Heinz and Erich Geiringer, and after the war, he's going to pick it up again. I have here a little book about some of his paintings, which a friend of me made. Perhaps later I can show you some of them. First, he did still lifes. I don't think you can see it. Anyway, never mind. And he was at one end as well. He wrote beautiful poetry, and he taught himself 6 languages. He really used his time extremely, extremely well. And so after a terrible, terrible journey, we arrived. The train stopped and the doors were opened. It was a lovely May day, and we saw we were in Auschwitz. So you can imagine, knowing what we have heard, this is where Jewish people were gassed. So we had to jump down. The next command was men and women to, anybody of you been at all to Auschwitz? Because in Germany, every child has to go to a concentration camp. Doesn't be usually Auschwitz, it's usually a camp in Germany itself. But nevertheless, Auschwitz has become an enormous, enormous tourist attraction. Doesn't sound very nice, but that's what it is. Millions of people go and see it. But so we knew exactly what to expect. And of course, you can imagine that it's terrible. But it is a huge, huge, huge area, many, many, many square miles. And it was not just Auschwitz. Auschwitz was a man camp. There was a woman camp called Birkenau. There was a work camp called Monoway. And there were all kinds of different parts of the camp. Huge, huge, huge area. The men went to Auschwitz. The women were in Birkenau. So you had to separate. Thinking probably knowing that you will never ever see each other on this earth. So can you imagine what a farewell this is? You cling to each other, you cry, you hold on till the Nazis came and beat us apart. And then the men walked away. We actually, this train was, sometimes I went to Auschwitz, sometimes to Birkenau. It was about 3 kilometers apart, those two camps. And, but all in a way connected because they were so huge. But the entrances were about 3 kilometers apart. So, so the men walked away, and then we heard whisper, Mengele, Mengele is coming. Mengele was a camp doctor, 40 years old approximately, a proper medical doctor, but he wasn't there to look after the health of people, but he was there to decide who was going to live and who was going to die. So everything was always rows of 5. So we had to go rows of 5 this way, big queue like this, and 5 people first row. And Mengele came, looked you over with a fraction of a second, and he decided right or left, life or death. We realized immediately that there were children, there were babies, mothers with babies on their arm, older people. All those people went to one side. I was 15 years old. I was not particularly tall, and I thought that this I will be separated from my mother. But the first miracle happened. My mother had been given in this holding camp from a good person, because we had only the clothes we were arrested in, a hat and coat, and my mother gave me that. She said, take it, perhaps it comes in useful later, which was going to be a later, but I put it on. And when Mengele looked at me for a fraction of a second, he didn't realize how young I was. Many girls from our transport who were even 16 or 17 went to the wrong side. We lost perhaps half our transport at this first selection. So after this, we were herded into the camp itself. This was all outside. You might have seen pictures of long rows, and in the front the Nazis taking this selection happening. It's all, and the peculiar thing, it's all recorded by the Nazis themselves. There are many, many pictures of all this, cattle truck, inside, selections, everything is in photographs by the Nazis. Amazing. And then there are people who deny this. This is, I think, the greatest insult which could have happened to the Holocaust, to deny that it happened, that it is just a fabrication of the Jewish people. Really shocking. So we were herded into a big, big barrack. The next command, undressed completely naked. Imagine you come from a civilized place where you have shame. Suddenly we had to undress naked. The young 20, 25-year-old Nazi boys were walking around, poking with their guns at our nakedness, laughing, pushing each other, giving us a push, laughing again. Can you imagine? From relatively normality to be pushed into something like that in a matter of a week. The next thing, we had to parade in front of a table, all naked. We had to give all the details, what age, what profession, which country you came, and was all registered. And then we were told, forget you are a human being. You're all going to be tattooed. You get a number on your arm. And if ever we want you, you're only going to be called out as a number. Then all our hair was shaved, not properly with a shaver, but with rough scissors and terrible things. razor blades a bit here and there. And while this was going on, and this is what I object the most, those young Nazis in the 20s told us, the family you have been separated from, if you go outside, you will smell the smoke because they have been gassed already and are now burning. So can you imagine a mother who had been just separated from her child? So people started to cry and to scream, and awful. So eventually we are naked, let out there, and so we passed an enormous heap of clothes. We were thrown one garment, no underwear, nothing. The next was just 2 shoes. Again, you got 2 shoes, could have been a boot and a sandal. And that was all the possessions we ever had. 2 shoes and 1 garment. Could have been a winter coat or a night dress, whatever. And then we were herded like sheep, you know, quick, into our barrack. Again, you might have seen pictures, 3 high bunks, quite large, large for 2 people, 3 people, but 8 people had to sleep there. So we climbed into this, and they told us, this is where you're going to live from now on, as long as you are alive. And that won't be long anyway. So we worked from morning to night. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we had to get up. We had to stand a roll call in front of our barrack, 2 hours, and the whole camp was counted. Then we got our breakfast, which was a little mug of liquid. Then we were taken to work from early morning till late at night, without any food, without any toilet break, without any drink. May, June got very, very hot with our shaved heads. We started in the bunks. There was nothing, no straw, no blanket, no mattress, nothing. The only thing it was bed bug and lice. Within a few days, we were full of bites and lice and bed bugs. Those were little animals with legs which suck your blood, and you try to get them away. They're very difficult to remove. Then you make wounds, became very itchy, you scratched. We were full of boils. We were starving. In the evening, we got a chunk of bread. That was all. Nothing in the morning, just a cup of liquid. So many people try to keep half of it for the morning, but where do you keep it? You had nowhere to keep it. The only place was to put your head under it, sleep on it. But in the night, it fell out and your neighbor ate it away from you. So hungry were people that they stole from your bedfellow, knowing that people would starve to death if you take away their bread. But people became really, selfish. To survive was really the main thing. They didn't care anymore about each other. And that was part of the system, you know, to dehumanize us, that we were just like wild animals. And life went on like this. It became winter, it became very, very, very cold. This is something which is important, but I know we might not have so much time. My mother, once a week we had a shower, which means we were deloused as well. And sometimes there were selections. And at one selection, naked, we had to parade in front of Mengele, and people who had become too thin were taken out and were gassed. And that happened perhaps in September to my mother. She paraded, I went first, then my mother followed, and Mengele picked her out with 40 people from our Dutch transport to be gassed. This was for me, as you can imagine, the worst moment. I lost my mother. But again, a miracle had happened. It's a long story, I'm afraid I can't tell you. She was saved, and towards the end, perhaps it was December, we were reunited again. By that time, the snow was so high. Sometimes when you run in the snow, the shoes had no laces. You lost your shoe, you were barefoot. I had terrible frostbite, open toes, which started to be infected. I hardly could walk. I was nearly on the point of giving up, but the Germans started to evacuate the camp. They knew, we didn't know, that the Russians were approaching. So they emptied barracks, many barracks were just emptied. People disappeared. We had no idea what has happened to them. And as well, many of the guards disappeared. So it was much more, sometimes we didn't go to work. Sometimes we just stayed in the barracks. Many people died. They were not buried anymore. The gas chambers, nothing functioned anymore. So we had to just heap them up outside the barrack. Can you imagine? Luckily it was snow, so they froze. But it became unbearable. What is going to happen? And one morning we woke up and the camp was deserted. The gates were open and the Germans had fled. And we were on our own. We could have gone out, but we were much too weak. Some Polish inmates left if they were near their families perhaps, or had connections and could speak the language, but we stayed. And eventually the Russians came. So you can imagine that was wonderful. But they were fighting. They didn't stay. They fed us, but left again. And we were left on our own again. I decided then I would go to Auschwitz. I didn't know exactly how far it was. I didn't really know where it was, but I was trying to go and find it, which I did. And after, at night, because there was fighting going on everywhere. So I think it took me about 6-7 hours, which was only 3 kilometers. And then in Auschwitz, which was much bigger than Birkenau, the Russians had made sort of a headquarters. The Nazis had gone there as well. And I started to search in the barracks if I could find my brother and father. I went everywhere. There were about 300-400 people left perhaps. And then I came across somebody who looked a little bit familiar. I went to him and I said, I must have seen you somewhere. I know you. He was very gaunt, very ashen color, very thin. And he looked at me as well and he said, yes, I know you too. I'm Otto Frank and you are Eva Geiringer, Anna's friend. I said, yes. And the first question was, have you seen my girls, my wife? I hadn't seen them. But he had seen my father and brother. So that was good news. I said, well, sure, they must be okay. The war must finish soon. That was the end of January. And we will be together again and life will go back to normality. But of course it wasn't. The war was still going on till May. And the Russians, I must say, no complaints about the Russian. Austria was occupied by the Russian. I'm sure it wasn't very good, but then the Austrians were the enemy of the Russians. But to us, they were respectful. They fed us, they transported us, they clothed us, they gave us Russian uniforms, and they transported us out of danger. They took us eastward because there was fierce fighting in Poland. And because the Germans didn't want the Russians to get into Germany, which of course eventually they did. And we traveled for 4 months with the Russians till we got to Odessa. Interesting to look on a map. It's quite far. It's on the Black Sea. It's the Ukraine. At that time, it belonged to Russia. Now it's independent. And there we waited for the end of the war. And that came, of course, on the 8th of May. And we realized it was big celebration there with the Russians and us. And there were many, many hundreds, thousands of people liberated. More the transport had come, not just from Auschwitz. And so we were all freed. But what now? Are the Russians going to look after us still? Are we going to stay there? Are they perhaps taking us to Siberia? What is happening? So it wasn't, that's it, you know? And eventually a New Zealand troop transport ship came and we could register where we wanted to go. And because they were all nationalities, and we had a beautiful journey on the Mediterranean, eventually back to Marseille. And there again, we had to wait till we were able to take a train. Again, that was all done by the population because we had no money, we had nothing. And so eventually we arrived in Amsterdam in June. So you can imagine from beginning of February to June, we were traveling all the time. And in Amsterdam, we were dropped at the station, and that was it. We had no money, we didn't know where to go, what is happening. But eventually, that's again a longer story, eventually we decided we would try to get in our apartment, and we could. But it was, we were not looked after by the Dutch. Nobody took any notice, nobody helped us. And why? Because all that's very, very important. All the occupied countries, Belgium, France, Denmark, Greece, had been liberated by the Allies. But Holland had been occupied by the Nazis till the end of the war, till May. And the Germans took every food which the Dutch produced to feed their own people. So in Holland, it was called the hunger winter. And tens of thousands of people died from lack of food. There were no cats and dogs. They all had been eaten. People went into apartments. There were 5 people, 2 parents, and 3 children lying dead on the floor. Can you imagine such a tragedy? And then came more people who had no money, no food, nowhere to live, and wanted help. And it just wasn't there. Otto Frank was with us on the whole way through Russia, came to Holland as well, and was looking for his family. Eventually, he heard that his wife and his 2 daughters had been killed. He was 57 years old, and he came to tell us that. And after he left, my mother said, how can this man carry on with his life? He has nothing to live for. We got as well a very cold, very formal letter from the Red Cross saying that my father and my brother had perished in Mauthausen, this terrible Austrian death camp, several days before the American army came to liberate that camp. Well, this was the last news I could cope with, and I became very, very depressed. You might think that is peculiar. I was more depressed afterwards than I was in the camp, because in the camp I had to fight. I had to fight for my life. I was 15, didn't want to die. I wanted to experience life, and hoping, assuming that if I survive, my family will survive. And so when I realized that I will never be a family anymore, and besides, most of the family who stayed behind in Austria, many of our family members were deported and killed. So we had very, very little family who were alive. And this prospect of living without family was frightening and horrific for me. So I found a little note much later that I'd written in 1st of January 1946 that life without my family is useless. I would like to commit suicide. Can you imagine? To survive the camp and then don't want to live on. And Otto Frank came one day with a diary, and that gave him a purpose in life, a hope again, and it published it and to spread Anna's message. And then I remembered Heinz's word about the paintings, and we went to this house and retrieved over 30 paintings and many wonderful poems. So this is a legacy I've got from Heinz. And Otto, and this is amazing, he had no hatred for the German people. He always came to us. He had nobody to go to, so my mother cooked him a meal and we talked about it. And I told him how I hate everybody. And he said, well, the people you hate, they don't suffer, they don't know, but you get miserable. And that was true. And he said, I don't hate the German. I'm a German myself. He said, if you look at history, most countries have done terrible, terrible things with other people. And look at history, that is true. The English in India and in South Africa, the French in Vietnam now, the Americans certainly with the Native Americans, and even now the prejudice against Black people. There is a lot of evil still. So he said the Germans, this was terrible what the Germans did, but they are unfortunately not the only one who have committed terrible sins against humanity. But I am a German as well, he said, and I'm a good person, and there are many, many Germans. They were just cowards. And that is what it was. Not everybody agreed, but they were bystanders. And this is when I teach the Holocaust now very often. I tell people, don't be a bystander. If you see injustice being done, speak up. That is a message for you as well, of course. So eventually, when I went back to school, but it was a difficult time for me. I didn't connect with my classmates. And when I was finished, Otto gave me his camera. He was a good photographer, a Leica, and he and my mother decided I should become a photographer. I was still very miserable in Holland, thinking, we were in the same apartment where I'd been happy with my brother and my father, and I didn't want to live in Holland anymore. So I was sent to England for a year. Otto knew somebody at the photographic studio, and I became an apprentice here. And I met a young man who had come from Israel to study economics. We became friends. And after 6 months, he asked me to marry him. And I said, no, thank you, because I said, I have to go back to Amsterdam to my mother. You can imagine, I was very, very close with my mother. I couldn't imagine I would just go off with somebody. And then one day, Otto Frank came over, and I told him this young man had asked me to marry him, and I like him. I can't say I loved him, but I like him, and I really wanted to get married and have a family. So and he got a bit embarrassed, and he said, well, your mother and me fell in love as well, and once you get settled, we like to get married. So I went back to this young man and said, well, we can get married now, which we did. We went the same year to Amsterdam and got married there, and we were married for 63 years. So I must say we really didn't know each other. On honeymoon, I started to know what kind of a man he is. I was very disappointed because I was very sporty and he was completely unsporty. So we went to Switzerland on holiday, and there was a chairlift, and I said, oh, we go up there, and he got pale. Oh, I can't go on this. But he was a wonderful man, and we had a very good marriage, I must say. We had to get to know each other. We had different ideas, but he, had missed a lot of my schooling. He was very, very clever, so he had little education, but he was self-educated. He did very well. We had 3 children, and now we have 5 grandchildren as well. And unfortunately, 3 years ago, I lost him, but he was 92. So this is, in a nutshell, my story. I didn't speak to my children till the 80s because it was too difficult. Why should you burden children, your own children who you love, with such a terrible, terrible story? But it seems to cause problems. There's a problem with second-generation children because there was always this secrecy in the family. And personally, I think I did the right thing. Perhaps I didn't. But there are special classes, physiotherapy classes for second generation and third generation people now. And now when a soldier comes from the war, he right away have counseling, because to have experienced something like that, you probably do need counseling. In America, I speak a lot in America to thousands of people. The first question I always get, did you have counseling when you came back? And I laugh. In 1945, there was no counseling in Europe. You had to just try to cope with the problem yourself. So, and now I think people have much more problems. The world is difficult to cope with. It's not so organized. And the counseling is now a big, big choice for many, many, many people. And 2 of my grandchildren want to go into counseling, become counselors, So obviously they have problems as well. And I wrote 3 books. The first one only in the 80s, after I started speaking. And I think it's 1 book, Eva Stories, translated into German as well. And you can read it. There's, of course, as I say, I just touched on most of the things. There's, of course, much, much more detail in my story. I think I probably have talked too long, but, you can't really, I left out anyway quite a bit, but it's difficult to pick out, to make the story, to make sense, you have to see the whole. You can't just tell little bits of things. Sometimes when I'm invited to a dinner, for a fundraising dinner, they give me, and I'm the speaker, I get 20 minutes. I said, that is very, very difficult. What can you tell in 20 minutes? So thank you. You've been a very, very attentive audience. I hope you understood everything, what I was saying. So, and I think we have a bit of time for questions. Thank you. Thank you.
Eva, thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Eva, thank you very much. That was like
60. Did I speak too long?
No, that was perfect, because I think you had this expression like your life in a nutshell. And I think that is really, I know that you like to describe your life very detailed, but many of the people here in the course already read your books. May I just, before we start with a bundle of questions, may I just ask you one really important question? How was that for you on Zoom, like giving your testimony, telling your story? How is that for you?
Well, I had a lot of health problems before I spoke up.
No. You misunderstood the question.
The question was, how was it when I spoke first?
No,
not first, like today. Like it's on Zoom. We are not around you.
Hey, on Zoom.
Oh, on Zoom. How it feels to speak on Zoom?
Yeah.
Well, it's it's not too bad because I can see people.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes I speak in an audience and they don't light up the audience, and that I really hate. I said I want light. I want to see to whom I speak.
Yeah.
Because you feel, you know, you look at the expression of the people, you see they're with you, they understand, and you know, I've seen you looking at me, I've seen you taking it in. So yes, I think it's not the same, but it's the second best, and not doing anything. I think it's better to have this.
Yeah. Okay.
I
Because
hope when one can go again to speak. You know, I know you've invited me several times to come to Munich, and I always say, sorry, I have no time. I have to go.
Yeah, very busy.
I know that. And through the, I'm stuck here now, I was able to help out. And when you asked me to do this, I said immediately yes, because I think it's important for me to speak to youngsters. And second best, okay, I accept that.
Okay, thank you. So shall we start like with the questions you have?
Sure,
and
sure.
Students, would that be okay if you write me? Because
I've got here my friend Elizabeth, who travels with me always, and she's staying with me now, and I don't always hear too well. It echoes a bit, you know. So she's going, if I don't understand the question, she's going to help
very
me.
welcome, and thank you very much, Elizabeth.
You could hear me very well and understand.
Yeah, it was really fine, and you did a wonderful job. I'm a little bit I think it's not my duty to say that you did a wonderful job, but we understood you, and I think it was interesting for me because I know your story, but you kept me and I got into your story again. And it's a difference if you tell the story and it's like at the same time, and it's not like watching a TV documentation or an oral history documentation. It makes really a difference. So that's great. So can we start like with questions concerning sort of like the camp? So that we bundle the questions a little bit? Would that be okay? Or would you like to just go and dive into the questions? I'm really totally open.
You want to have the question now?
Yeah, sure.
Mm-hmm. And could you write me maybe, because I have you, that is what I wanted to say. I have you on two screens, students and colleagues. Would you be so kind and maybe send me like on chat a short message that you are now in the line of speaking? So who wants to start? Bernike, would you like to start? You're just sitting next to me, just I see you.
We're starting.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Okay. Rachel, klappt es nicht?
I can't hear.
You have to put on your microphone. Now it should, now we hear you.
Okay. I've got actually not a question about Auschwitz, but rather about how are you feeling today during the lockdown, and how are you experiencing the different a lot of Verschwörungstheorien, how Corona is started by Jews especially. How are you feeling about that?
How do you feel about the coronavirus now? How do you feel? How are you feeling?
Well, you know, a lot of people ask me, does it feel simple? Because we were actually in America when it became serious in America. And I was halfway, I do twice a year, I do a tour in America for 6 weeks. And I speak to thousands and thousands of schools and well, adults as well. And And people asked me and it was interrupted. I came back and we were in quarantine here. We haven't been out for 2 months out of the house. And people ask me very often, so that must feel like you were in hiding. And I must say, I haven't compared it at all till people started to compare it, because this was man-made, the Holocaust. You know, this now is nature. So people had nothing to do with it. So it's a different reason. And at the time as well, actually, when we went into hiding, my father thought, because I didn't want to separate it, my father said, oh, it will be finished by Christmas, few months. And this too, people say, oh, it's going to be a very short time. But nobody expected it would spread so much and it would be long. But I can't say I feel it is the same. The only thing, of course, that, and then we stay at home, there's no danger that we will be arrested. So it is actually quite different, but it is very sad. And I think a lot of people will find it really very difficult to stay at home and not mix with friends. And yeah, it is a completely new thing. And it's something we have to get used to.
Okay, there's another question, Daniel.
Thank you for your time, and also, first of all, as a, let's say, stubborn Taurus to another Taurus, happy birthday, a bit belated. I have a question about the camp, or Mengele especially. Did you have any other run-ins with him? Has he been walking around the camp, and how did you perceive him?
About the camp walking?
Yeah.
About
Mengele. You know, did you have any more encounters with him? Did he go around the camp?
Oh, Mengele, yes. Well, yes, I had actually several encounters with him, but I must say, so he was, you can't say he was a human being, because he did terrible, terrible things. He raped people, and terrible, terrible things. But he saved my mother. First, as I say, that's a long story. He's a cousin of us worked with him, and she went to him and said her cousin was selected, he should go and look at her again, and he did. So there must have been a little grain of humanity still in him. He needn't have bothered, but he did. And yeah, and so I did see him. He walked around, and of course, if you walked near the hospital, he came in and out, you saw him. Hospital was just a barrack, wasn't really a hospital, but he did those terrible experiments on people. He was a really, and I've read many books about people who were raped by him and made pregnant by him even, and he killed his own children. You know, not a human person.
Frau Kereshi.
The question.
First of all, thank you for your time. And as you said, there was no counseling at this time. What did you do to be able to deal with all your feelings? And when did you become able of feeling better? And would you say that you are now over it? And how long did it take for you? And what did it take?
Yeah, well, it sounds terrible. It took me 40 years, and really speaking, opening up and seeing the sympathy of people and the interest of people helped me. All my illnesses disappeared, and my shyness, I was very shy. I wouldn't have spoken to two people, you know. So it is important to open up, to speak, to share, definitely. And that an advice to you young people, if you have problems, do share it with your parents, with your teachers, with your friends, and it does help.
it really does help. So who else has a question before I pop in Herr Hüttel?
Yeah,
and then
so
Miss Elsesser.
my question is, Eva, you spoke a lot about hope in the camp. At which point did you feel like you were safe, or that it was all over? Was it on the day of the liberation or later?
When did you feel that it was all over? You felt safe again when you know, after the Russians came?
Well, the Russians came, but we had no idea what they were going to do with us, you know. Peter, the boy who was hiding with Anne Frank, he was with Otto Frank, you know, they were all arrested. You know the diary? I suppose you do. There were 8 people hiding. And he said, I have to go with the Germans on transport, which turned out to be the death marches, because he didn't know then. But he said, I don't want to stay because the Russians are coming. He was afraid of the Russians. I don't know why. But we didn't know what they were going to do with us. So we did, till we were on a boat, we were not really sure we were ever getting back to the West. And yeah, and then even, you know, I didn't tell that, but we wanted to go on board off the boat in Constantinople, and the Turks didn't want us. They say, you might have illnesses, and so we couldn't go home. Then we went to Genoa. They wanted to leave us there. The Italians didn't want us either. Then we were a few days in the harbor, and the captain was negotiating who is going to take those people. Eventually, he heard that Marseille would take us, you know? So, you know, we were still kind of people who were not accepted by the community. I don't know why. So very, very interesting question.
Yeah, so when did you start feeling free and feeling safe?
Well, I think once we were in Holland, we were feeling safe, but still not happy at all. As I said, we were very, very anxious. And there was, as I said, there was no food, there was no gas, there was no light sometimes, there was chaos. So you came again from chaos into another kind of chaos. So, and of course, till we had news, hoping still that it would be good news, it was great anxiety. So it took really, really, really long time till you were, and as I say, I was not happy in Holland. In England, I was not at ease either. So yeah, it was very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Okay.
But I must say, I'm a very happy person now. I've accepted, I'm not blaming anybody anymore. And yeah, it's a different feeling, you know. But it took me a long, long, long time.
Svenja.
Hello. Thanks for telling us your story, first of all. And then I wanted to ask, how do you feel about the refugee camps, that there is still something like that in the 21st century, even though your main message is preaching to be open to everyone? Doesn't that make you kind of angry still? Because it makes me angry.
How do you feel about the refugee camps, which are all over the world these days? Are you, you know?
Well, the refugee problem, I think it's horrific, it's terrible. And, you know, that I must say, I can feel for those people. I was a refugee. I was a refugee for many, many years. And we were not treated, I mean, we were not as bad off as refugees now, but many people couldn't even become refugees. And this is a sad thing. You know, many, many more people wanted to leave Germany and Austria, and couldn't. And those people went to their deaths. And this is why I can understand that people leave their country, especially Syria, where they might really lose their life if they stay, and people don't accept them. And especially America, who is a country of refugees. There's no single, well, there's the Native American, but there's no single person really who is really American. You know, they all come from countries where it was difficult, it was bad, they wanted to better their life, and they succeeded. And and here too, I mean, England, the kinder transport, you know, the English let in 10,000 children without their parents. Terrible, terrible thing. But they became refugees, and they all have done very, very well. Refugees are strong people. You know, they have the courage to leave their own country. I would have loved to stay in Austria. You know, I hated to go to Belgium or Holland.
Svenja, is that answer?
No.
Do you want to continue with asking a question? I have the feeling.
If you still have questions, sure, sure.
No,
Or otherwise, we'll go over to Verena again.
So 75 years after the end of World War II, you went again to a camp to Mauthausen to look for the grave of your father and your brother. How did it feel? And first of all, why now? Did you feel like ready to go there? And did you feel, how was it? Was it like a time flashback, or was it really strange for you and you couldn't refer to it at all?
Did you understand? Did you understand?
Well, if I didn't, you know, grave, and I didn't think, and there was no grave.
No,
you know,
no,
but no, not the question.
No.
Speak louder.
You know, why did you go back to Mauthausen?
And why I went now? When I went now back.
How did you feel?
You know, it was many, many, many years I didn't want to go to Mauthausen. The Dutch have a big, big monument there, and they go, you know, all those youngsters were taken to Mauthausen first and later as well. And they have invited me many, many times to go along with them. And I knew Mauthausen. You know about Mauthausen? With a staircase. It's a stone quarry.
Yeah.
And they have a big staircase, and people had to work there. And very often they carried up those rocks, and then when they got to the top, they were pushed, and this whole, like a domino, it all fell down with the big rocks on top of them. So a terrible, terrible way of being murdered. Have you heard of that ever?
Yeah, but how did you feel when
And
you went to
so
visit?
I didn't want to go there. But with the filming, they said, look, there is no camp. It is just a memorial. There are many, many, all the countries in Europe and as well from outside have big monuments. It's like going to a cemetery. So I said, okay. And when I saw the names of the monument, and I saw the staircase, and I thought, how did they die? What happened? You know, I felt terrible. And then they told me they were here only 2 days. They never even died in Mauthausen. So I was even more shocked. I said, what do you mean? They, you know, and then it turned out they were taken to, can't think of the name now.
Ebensee.
What is it called?
Ebensee,
which was 200 kilometers from 100 kilometers from Mauthausen. And they said, you want to go there? That is where your father and brother died. And I was so shocked. I said, I don't know if I want to see it. But they convinced me. They said, you can see the grave and so on. So I said, okay, I went there. And I was even more shocked because they had the dates of when my father and brother had died. And I just tell you, it's perhaps a bit long, but I always assumed that my brother died first. My father thought his wife was dead. He thought I couldn't have survived. I think he gave up. But it turned out that my father in Ebensee, he died in March. I have the exact date from him, I think 26th of March. And my brother died only the 4th of May. So really few days before the Americans came. And that really shocked me, because my brother was not as strong. He was not sporty, he was an artist, hated sport. And my father was very sporty, a very strong man. So I thought my brother was said as well in one of my books. He was very, very, very much afraid of dying. So I thought he kept on with the last strength in his body to try to survive, and he didn't succeed. All on his own, without my father's support, he's nearly survived. That was for me a terrible, terrible shock. And then they told me, because it was Americans were near, they were just thrown in a mass grave. So there is just a tiny little stone, and that is supposed to be the mass grave of hundreds of victims. My father, they still know that, was still cremated there. That was for me a terrible, terrible shock. The only thing is, it is a beautiful area, a big tourist area, and they were after all born in Austria. I thought that is a place perhaps where they belong.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Eva, as you said, you wrote several books, and like Verena asked you the question on the documentary we watched on the Austrian TV, which we thought was very moving for us.
You all saw it?
Yeah, and this was really moving. And may I ask you the question, what do you think, because you have so many different forms of giving your testimony, what do you prefer, like, except from speaking to us? Do you prefer your books or the oral history interviews or the holograms? What do you like best to transport your message?
I prefer to speak to audiences.
Yeah.
Definitely. Because then you feel their emotion. You know, all the other thing is, it's important. You know, I make many documents, and it's important. The hologram is important for the future. In Chicago, I made now recently a small film, about 20 minutes. Well, it was actually 3 hours, but they showed only 20 minutes. But when you go there, they show first the film, because in 10 years, in 20 years, when we are not there anymore, what will the children or even the adults know to ask for questions if they don't know anything? So they have to know something about our life first before they can ask questions. But this, I talk and you can ask questions, and so we have rapport together. So this is, of course, much, much more valuable to give proper answers to your questions.
And did you see yourself as a hologram, Eva, in Chicago?
Did you see?
Yes, I saw it. I saw it with an audience, and yes, because
how was it?
Well, I'd seen it before, and
Okay.
I asked myself actually a question. I said, "Can I see your tattoo?" Because that is what children usually would like to see, but they don't ask because they think I might be embarrassed. But a hologram, they ask, of course. And so they said, this is the most asked question by kids. Can we see your tattoo? And of course, I do show it on the hologram.
Yeah, we know that. Okay. Some more questions on your side from the students, maybe. You covered really a lot. I have a question maybe to the documentary then, because I think interesting was that there was like Arthur Seyss Inquart.
Yeah.
Did you meet him? Did you meet perpetrators? How was that?
The documentary always wanted me to meet him.
I thought that.
Or the granddaughter who is alive as well.
Yeah.
I must say I had no particular interest to meet them because, first of all, as I must admit, I knew there was a Nazi who was in charge in Holland, but I didn't really know much about him. And I must say I was not interested at all. And I don't think his interview was particularly relevant to the story. Did you think it was?
I think it was interesting because, and I think that is what you said at the end, that you as a victim in particular, but also the people the relatives of the perpetrators, they all have to struggle with the history. And I think that was interesting that you also mentioned that your children in our talk today struggled with the history. Yeah. But it was maybe a little bit dramatic that you had like the perpetrator or relative of the perpetrator and you. And I just was wondering if you have met there or how it was to speak to each other. Yeah. Because I felt a little bit sad for this person. He wanted to work for the Anne Frank Trust and he wasn't allowed to do that. And this was a little bit moving at the other side too. I don't know if you got me with my sort of funny English.
Well, what she said is when they listened to the documentary and this guy, this Nazi relative, talked about his father, grandfather. Yeah, he was. She was quite moved that he wasn't accepted to work for the Anne Frank Trust. Yeah, the Anne Frank in Holland.
House in the Netherlands.
I haven't met him, but they do employ a lot of German people in the Anne Frank house actually. And they volunteer. I think you can go in the army or you can volunteer to wear the charity, and a lot of them. And I must say, here as well, in the Anne Frank, where I'm president, I was used to be just the founder actually. They had German youngsters, and I remember very, very clearly. I met them. They were guides. It's an exhibition, Anne Frank exhibition, and one saw my number. And he started to cry and he said to me, "Can you ever forgive me?" And I felt very, very sorry for him. I said, "There's nothing to forgive you. You were not born. You are not guilty." And he said, "But I do feel guilty." And I felt very sorry for him because it might spoil his life feeling guilty what his grandfather or perhaps not even have done anything, but as a German, he felt guilty about it. And that is sad because people shouldn't feel guilty, the young ones.
What about the question of this man? What about this question of this man? Why
what?
Why didn't you want to see him?
Well, I had no interest in him. I mean, what would he, And no, I just was not interested. I had the only time I had a confrontation with a Nazi somewhere in America. There was an old man who said he was a Hitler Youth. And they asked me if I would want to have a debate with him with a crowd of kids as well. And I said, well, if he admits he was a Hitler Youth, and so he must have been very sorry. And he came and he said, he said, you know, it is actually like you go to the Boy Scouts. We didn't do any harm.
Mm-hmm.
We were having campfires, we were having stories, we did music, and he was not guilty, he didn't feel guilty about anything. And I said to him, I know the hit Horst Bessel lied. I don't know if you know that. It goes, if Jewish blood drips from our knives.
Mm-hmm.
I said, did you sing this Nazi song? And he said, of course we did. You know, we all did. But it doesn't mean anything. And I said, well, if you say that doesn't mean anything, I don't want to carry on with this debate. So he was obviously not sorry for what he has done. And the Hitler Youth were trained to become Nazis.
Mm-hmm. Eva, thank you very much. I have two more questions. Are you still able to answer two more questions?
Sure.
Sure, wonderful. Daniel and then Verena.
With the current rise of nationalism around the world and the far-right populism, how do you feel about that? Is that a bit comparable to the atmosphere, the feeling in the 1930s and 1940s?
Well, it's not comparable because it's just people want a change in the world, which I think we need a change in the world, but they go the wrong direction. And I think now what is happening in America, I think there will be a change for a while at least. I don't know if it will last, but I really don't understand why people can't accept each other for who they are, especially religious discrimination. You know, I went to school in Holland, where we learned in history the 80-year war between Protestant and Catholics, and not just ordinary wars. They burned down their houses, their churches. They killed thousands of people, both Christians. I mean, what is all this about? You know, why can't people accept each other? It's what beliefs they have. That is, you know, and what colors they have. I really don't understand why we are discriminated against particular things, characteristics of people. So some good, decent people, just with a different point of view from a different God. It's all the same. No, they hate each other and kill each other. And that has been going on right through history, not only against Jews, against Muslims, against black people, against whatever. So it's just against Buddhists, you know, and I don't understand that.
The far right. So
and this we have to really change. We have to stick together and try to create a safe world for everybody. And as well, wars. Wars have never benefited anybody, only the weapon industry. But we could use the money in much better ways.
Thank you. Now Verena and then Florian.
That would have been my question too, but do you have any recommendation for the younger generation like us? Because I feel like we have a responsibility to do something against discrimination and so on. But do you have any special recommendation for us how we should deal with people who discriminate someone else?
Recommendation?
What would you say to those young people and recommend that what they should do towards not discriminating other people, being more tolerant? And
well, first of all, of course, not to be bystanders, because that was what happened in Germany. A lot of people didn't agree with what was going on, but they just went along. And that is, I think, what a lot of people do anyway now. I don't think all those people who do bad things really hate, but because a neighbor or a friend says, let's do this, and those people are bad, and they just go along. So stand up if you see any evil, and have an opinion and talk about it. If your friend says something nasty, tell them to shut up about things like that, to change their attitude. You know, it's difficult. I know it's difficult to change all this, but if we all work together, and I think now in America, the people have started to wake up. It's not only the black people who are demonstrating, it is really all the people are really, really upset about this, what has happened, that a policeman who is supposed to help people, to guard people, has the audacity to kill somebody in this way. I mean, this is just unbelievable. People really start to feel enough is enough. And perhaps it will start to change a little bit. But we all have to work together to talk about what should be done, what is justice. And as soon as we hear somebody is doing something wrong, to report it and tell the people and so on. We have to be active. We don't have to be bystanders. I hope we will succeed eventually.
Okay, and I have one more question on my list. Florian, please go ahead.
If it's different in German and
how do you feel talking in German about the language, using the language in German?
I have nothing whatsoever against language.
How do you manage to talk about it in German? Is it okay?
Well, I do sometimes speak in Germany, but that's okay. I don't feel bad about that. Not the question.
No, not quite. If you do it in German, in the language, how do you feel doing it in German, speaking in German?
Well,
Does
it's
it bother
not
you because it reminds you of your past, or?
No, I have nothing against the language, and I no, because it's still my mother tongue, and I know that in perhaps in 48, 39, we were in Switzerland once, and there were a group of Germans, veterans from the war. One had no arm, one had a patch on his eye, and things like that, and they were reminiscing about the war and speaking German, of course. And at that time, I really hated it. Or when I was in a queue in a ski lift and I heard German, I really couldn't stand the language. But a long time already, I speak it when I'm in Germany, and I go to Germany. I have nothing against going to Germany at all. I speak in schools there. I feel actually very much at home. But it took a long time, I must say. For a long time, I didn't want to speak. So not speak it, don't even hear it.
So how do you feel about the German population now?
Well, it's German population is innocent now. The people are innocent. They haven't done anything, and actually, they are the only country who has helped Israel a lot. Israel wouldn't be what they are now without the German help. Germany is very sorry what has happened. Of course, there are neo-Nazis, of course, but the majority of the German people are ashamed and sorry what has happened. I think you will agree with that. And it is sad that people are still, I spoke once, my last little story, I spoke once, here is a German school in Richmond, a suburb here, and I was invited to speak there, and we had lunch with the children, young children, and there was a 14-year-old boy sitting next to me, and I asked him, do you mix with the English population being in a German school? He said, well, not really, because the parents know each other, so we usually mix together with the other German families. But the only time we mix is when we play a football game with English schools. And then he started to cry, really cry. And I said, "What's the matter with you?" He said, "You know," and they call us the Nazis. And then he said, "I'm not a Nazi. I haven't done anything." You know, he just lost his speech. He was so sad, so upset. And I said, "Of course you're not a Nazi, but you know, this is how it is. There's still, if there is a rivalry, no, how you say, rivalry, then it comes out, oh, the Germans are the Nazis." But you know, that is of course not true, but it shows you there's still a prejudice sometimes. After the war, the Dutch said they will never go to Germany, they will never trade with Germany, and a year later, they were best friends. And that is how it should be.
Eva, you gave us your testimony. You answered many questions, also political questions, heading for our present and the future. And when I read your book after Auschwitz, you wrote like this passage that you can nearly anticipate most of the questions people ask you. And this is for now, I think, our last question. Is there still one question missing you are waiting for? People are not asking.
Is there one question?
Questions you're waiting for and nobody asks it.
Well, which you always think, why haven't they asked me that? One question. I don't think so.
I don't think so. Well, I mean, if I've forgiven the Germans, could be a question, which I don't think it has been asked in this way. And I must say, of course now, but this is another long story. That is, I won't tell it, but it was somebody in Weimar I spoke in a castle, and the next day I got a letter from a lady who had been there with her daughter, and it turned out that her father was a big Nazi, but she had never ever talked to her family about it. And that her daughter was very upset that her opa was a Nazi. And so they had a long conversation and so on. And well, she told me about her father, different things, and I realized he was not really a bad man. And I wrote that to her, and we've been in correspondence, and she thanked me for bringing it in the open. Now she feels, after 40 years, she has talked openly about it and how she relieved it. She's a different person now. And then I thought, I feel sorry for those people, you know, so, and then I thought I've forgiven them.
I think that is like a wonderful ending of the session, and that is, we are very grateful that you shared your time and that you especially ended with forgiveness concerning the Germans too. I think that is very helpful for us too. And Eva, thank you for your time. Thank you for this very, challenging surrounding we have here via Zoom. I think we got interesting insights on your story, on a Holocaust survivor story, and we continue working with your history for the end of semester, and we will probably come back to you. I thank you for all of us, Eva, and yeah, I just don't want to say goodbye now. It is hard.
Question, how old are you all? What age?
Well, I'm out. I think around 20, 25, is okay? Between 20 and 25.
Right. So are you at the end of your studies or not yet?
Sort of. So in between, I think.
Oh, between.
In between, not at the very beginning, but not at the very end, but maybe...
in the middle.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, okay.
Eva, thank you very much.
Good luck to all of you. I hope you get a good job, a good profession, and will help to create a better and safer world for everybody.
Thank you. Goodbye to London.
Thank you.
And goodbye to Elizabeth. Thank you very much, Eva. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Sind alle noch da? Keiner will gehen, gell? Eva, you can't leave us.
Oh, no.
You're stuck here.
But it was quite an experience, I must say. I haven't done Zoom with so many young people. I have 2 more coming up, one in America and the other one in, where's the other one?
Brazil.
Where?
Brazil.
In Brazil, no, Argentina.
Argentina, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just, Munich is just around the corner. I get the feeling.
Yeah, I know. Well,
Bye-bye, take care.
Perhaps I come to Munich
Stay
one day.
healthy.
Oh, my husband. Oh. Did you switch it on?
Yeah. Because he said bye-bye.
I wanted to say that
We are still here, Eva.
husband came from Munich, by the way.
I know.
His mother was in Israel, and she went back and lived in Munich. And I went to visit very often there, but it was, of course, in the 50s, and I really hated it, I must say.
Munich in the 50s, that was pretty
It's a lovely
complicated,
city,
I think.
But at the time there were still a lot of Germans in with hats with feathers and Lodenmantel, and it reminded me very much of the Nazi time. But now I know it's quite different.
And what was the last time when you went to Munich? What do you think?
Oh, last year?
Well, not even so long, because there's a lawyer there who wanted to do the play. He wanted to try to get our play, and then they came for me, Remembering the World of Anne Frank. He wanted to get it to Munich. But so he invited me there, and I spoke to different people, but it never happened. Never happened, yeah. So
that is our job then, I think.
But my husband went to school in Ingolstadt.
Yeah.
It's not far from Munich. And we did the play there. And it was a very, very moving play. And they hoped they would get a prize in Berlin when there was a competition for school plays, but they didn't.
Theater performances, right. Yeah. Okay.
We could go on talking.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, we stay here a little bit longer. Bye-bye, Eva. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
I might come back with a mail.
Yeah, okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.